For centuries, Korea held fast to its isolationist policies, earning the moniker the Hermit Kingdom. However, this seclusion could not last forever. By the mid-19th century, Western powers, eager to expand their influence and tap into new markets, began to exert pressure on Korea. Japan, itself undergoing a period of rapid modernization, saw Korea as a crucial stepping stone to continental Asia. In 1876, Japan forced Korea to sign the Treaty of Ganghwa, effectively ending Korea's isolation. This treaty, far from being an agreement between equals, marked the beginning of Japan's aggressive encroachment upon its neighbor. It pried open Korean ports to Japanese trade and granted extraterritorial rights to Japanese citizens in Korea. The treaty served as a template for similar agreements imposed by other Western powers, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, Germany, and France. Korea, once a proud and independent nation, was now being carved up by foreign powers. These intrusions into Korean affairs had a profound impact on the country's internal politics. The Korean court became bitterly divided between those who favored modernization and engagement with the outside world, and those who clung to isolationism. The growing influence of foreign powers also fueled internal power struggles, weakening the already fragile Joseon dynasty. This period of intense external pressure and internal division set the stage for the tumultuous events that would shape Korea's destiny in the 20th century. The once isolated Hermit Kingdom was now caught in a dangerous game of great power politics, its fate intertwined with the ambitions of its powerful neighbors. As the 19th century drew to a close, Japan's ambitions in Korea became increasingly apparent. The nation, having rapidly modernized and industrialized, was eager to expand its influence and secure its place among the world's great powers. Japan saw Korea as essential to its imperial ambitions, a land bridge to the Asian mainland and a source of raw materials and resources. The strategic location of Korea made it a coveted prize for Japan's burgeoning empire. However, Japan's designs on Korea brought it into conflict with another rising power in the region, China. The Qing dynasty, which had long held influence over Korea, was not willing to relinquish its control without a fight. In 1894, the Donghak Peasant Revolution erupted in Korea, fueled by widespread discontent with government corruption and foreign influence. This internal strife provided both Japan and China with a pretext to intervene. Both China and Japan sent troops to Korea, ostensibly to quell the rebellion. However, their true intentions were to assert dominance over the peninsula. However, the conflict quickly escalated into the First Sino-Japanese War, a clash for dominance over Korea and the surrounding region. This war marked a significant turning point in East Asian geopolitics. Japan's victory in the war, cemented by the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895, shattered China's waning influence in Korea. The treaty was a humiliating blow to the Qing dynasty. The treaty forced China to recognize Korea's independence, which in reality paved the way for Japan's unchecked dominance. Korea's newfound independence was merely a stepping stone for Japanese control. Japan's victory sent shockwaves throughout Asia, marking its emergence as a major military power and signaling its growing appetite for territorial expansion. The balance of power in the region was irrevocably altered. Japan's ambitions did not stop with Korea. The nation continued to look outward, eyeing other territories for expansion. In 1904, Japan and Russia, two rising imperial powers with conflicting interests in Manchuria and Korea, went to war. This conflict was another test of Japan's military prowess. The Russo-Japanese War, fought on land and sea, ended in a decisive victory for Japan. This victory further solidified Japan's status as a formidable military power. The Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, recognized Japan's paramount political, military, and economic interests in Korea. This international recognition was a significant diplomatic triumph for Japan. These two wars, fought in the span of a decade, fundamentally altered the balance of power in East Asia. Japan's victories demonstrated its military capabilities and strategic acumen. Japan, once a peripheral player in regional politics, had emerged as a formidable force, poised to exert its dominance over Korea and beyond. The stage was set for Japan's continued expansion and influence in the early 20th century. With its rivals vanquished, Japan moved swiftly to consolidate its control over Korea. In 1905, Japan imposed the Eulsa Treaty, stripping Korea of its diplomatic sovereignty and making it a protectorate of Japan. This treaty, signed under duress, marked the beginning of Korea's formal colonization. 5 years later, in 1910, Japan completed its annexation of Korea, dissolving the Korean government and declaring the peninsula a Japanese colony. The annexation, met with widespread resistance from the Korean people, ushered in a brutal period of colonial rule that would last for 35 years. Japan's colonial policies were designed to assimilate Korea into the Japanese Empire and erase Korean national identity. The Japanese imposed their language and culture on Korean society. Korean schools were forced to teach Japanese, Korean newspapers were shut down, and Korean names were replaced with Japanese ones. The Japanese colonial administration implemented a system of economic exploitation, extracting resources from Korea to fuel Japan's industrial growth. Korean farmers were forced to grow rice for export to Japan, often leaving them with little to feed their own families. Koreans were also subjected to forced labor, conscripted to work in mines, factories, and on infrastructure projects for the benefit of the Japanese Empire. This period of harsh colonial rule left a deep scar on the Korean psyche, a collective trauma that would continue to shape Korean identity and politics long after the end of World War II. The memory of Japanese colonization would fuel Korean nationalism, but it would also contribute to the divisions that would split the peninsula in two. Section 4. Seeds of Resistance. Despite the brutality of Japanese rule, the spirit of Korean resistance never truly died. The Korean people, with their rich history and deep sense of national identity, found ways to resist and push back against their oppressors. From the moment the Japanese set foot on Korean soil, Koreans from all walks of life rose up to oppose the occupiers. This resistance was not limited to a single group or class, it was a collective effort that spanned the entire nation. Students, farmers, intellectuals, and even former government officials took part in a multifaceted resistance movement that sought to restore Korean independence. Each group brought its own unique strengths and perspectives to the struggle. One of the most significant acts of resistance was the March 1st movement, which erupted in 1919. This movement was a pivotal moment in Korean history, marking a unified stand against Japanese oppression. Triggered by the death of former Emperor Gojong, who was rumored to have been poisoned by the Japanese, the movement saw millions of Koreans across the country take to the streets in peaceful protests. These protests were a powerful demonstration of the Korean people's desire for freedom. The protesters, waving the Korean flag which was banned by the Japanese, demanded independence and self-determination. The sight of the forbidden flag became a symbol of defiance and hope. The Japanese authorities responded to the March 1st movement with brutal force. The crackdown was swift and merciless, aiming to crush the spirit of resistance. Thousands of Koreans were killed or wounded, and tens of thousands more were arrested and imprisoned. The cost of resistance was high, but the determination of the Korean people remained unbroken. Although the movement was brutally suppressed, it had a profound impact on the Korean independence movement. It galvanized the nation and showed the world the Korean people's unwavering resolve. It demonstrated the depth of Korean resentment towards Japanese rule and inspired further acts of resistance. The seeds of defiance had been sown, and they would continue to grow. The March 1st movement also had international ramifications. It drew global attention to the plight of the Korean people and their struggle for independence. It led to the formation of the Korean Provisional Government in Shanghai, China. This government in exile became a beacon of hope for many Koreans. The KPG, composed of Korean exiles, sought to gain international recognition and support for Korean independence. They worked tirelessly to keep the cause of Korean freedom alive on the world stage. Although the KPG never achieved full diplomatic recognition, it served as a symbol of Korean resistance and a rallying point for Koreans both at home and abroad. It kept the dream of independence alive. Despite facing overwhelming odds, the Korean independence movement continued to operate both inside Korea and abroad throughout the Japanese colonial period. The resilience and courage of the Korean people were unwavering. These acts of resistance, both big and small, kept the flame of Korean nationalism burning, setting the stage for the eventual liberation of Korea at the end of World War II. The sacrifices made by countless Koreans were not in vain, as they paved the way for a free and independent Korea. Section 5. a divided peninsula. After decades of Japanese colonial rule, Korea's liberation in 1945 should have been a joyous occasion, a moment of national pride and unity. However, the end of World War II brought about not unity and independence, but a new set of challenges that would ultimately lead to the division of the Korean peninsula. The hopes of a unified Korea were dashed as new geopolitical realities set in. With Japan's defeat, the Allied powers decided to temporarily divide Korea along the 38th parallel as a matter of military expediency. This decision was made hastily, without consulting the Korean people, who had long yearned for self-determination. The Soviet Union would accept the surrender of Japanese forces north of the line, while the United States would do the same in the south. This arrangement, though intended to be temporary, set the stage for a prolonged and painful division. This division, initially intended to be temporary, would have long-lasting consequences for the Korean people. Families were torn apart, and a once unified nation found itself split into two ideologically opposed states. The division of Korea along the 38th parallel was a product of the emerging Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The ideological battle between communism and capitalism played out on Korean soil. The two superpowers, once allies against Japan, now viewed each other with suspicion and distrust. Their mutual animosity and desire for global influence turned Korea into a battleground for their competing visions of the world. Each sought to expand its sphere of influence, and Korea, strategically located in Northeast Asia, became a pawn in their global struggle for dominance. The peninsula's fate was no longer in the hands of its own people. The United States, eager to contain the spread of communism, supported the establishment of a pro-Western government in South Korea. This government was seen as a bulwark against the spread of Soviet influence in Asia. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, backed a communist regime in the north, led by the young revolutionary Kim Il-sung. Kim's leadership was instrumental in shaping the future of North Korea. Kim, a veteran of the anti-Japanese resistance who had fought alongside Soviet forces during World War II, quickly consolidated his power in the north, establishing a one-party state based on the Soviet model. His regime would become one of the most repressive in the world. The division of Korea, intended to be a temporary measure, quickly solidified into a seemingly insurmountable barrier between the two Koreas. The hopes for reunification grew dimmer with each passing year. The 38th parallel, once an arbitrary line on a map, became a heavily fortified border, separating families, friends, and a people with a shared history and culture. The scars of this division are still felt today, as the Korean peninsula remains one of the most volatile regions in the world.